Yeast is the ingredient that's responsible for fermentation and eventually the proofing of our dough. As the yeast metabolize sugar, carbon dioxide and alcohol are produced, causing the dough to rise, which is also known as leavening. Yeast plays a big role in the flavors originated by fermentation. It also has nutritional benefits such as vitamin D, B, and minerals. Yeast is available in different forms. The most common for pizza and bread making are compressed, active dry, and instant dry. Their function is the same and can be used in almost any application interchangeably, but will work better in specific applications. Compressed yeast is also known as fresh yeast. Compressed yeast is cream yeast that has had most of the water drained. It is a cost-effective solution, but it's not very tolerant to temperature change and must always be refrigerated. This is the preferred yeast when the dough will be frozen. Active dry yeast, sometimes written in recipes as ADY, is a dehydrated form of fresh yeast and doesn't require refrigeration. Active dry yeast has a long shelf life compared to fresh yeast. Unlike other yeasts, you need to add pump water between 90 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit to rehydrate it, prior to adding the yeast in your dough recipe. Instant dry yeast uses the same process to dehydrate fresh yeast. Unlike active dry yeast, instant dry yeast does not need to be rehydrated. It can be directly added to the flour. This yeast is often written in recipes as IDY. Here is a simple conversion table for different types of yeast. There are a variety of factors that can affect the performance of the yeast in your dough recipe. 1. Temperature. The optimum fermentation happens between 81 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. At lower temperatures, the yeast will slow its performance and work slower. At higher temperatures, it will work faster. Once you reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit, the yeast and fermentation decrease and eventually stop, due to yeast cells death. 2. Salt. The amount of salt in your dough recipe can affect the activity of the yeast. More salt, less activity. Less salt, more activity. 3. Sugar. The amount of sugar in your dough can also affect yeast activity. If the amount of sugar in your dough is between 5 to 10%, yeast activity will increase. When you go above 10% sugar, yeast activity will decrease because of its hydrophilic nature. If your sugar is above 10%, use a specific osmotolerant yeast. And finally, pH. The optimum environment for the yeast is when the pH is between 4 and 6. When you go above or below that, the fermentation slows. Ultimately, the amount of yeast needed for your dough will be based on the temperature of the environment, the ingredients, the friction factor given the force applying during mixing, and the time the dough will stay at room temperature or in the refrigerator. I hope this overview of yeast was helpful. Be sure to keep watching to learn more about essential dough-making ingredients.